Nilu, is a kind of a related question. How do you confirm authenticity? Or even let's back up one step further. You were born in Iran. Tell us when you left and when the last time was you were back in Iran.
I left when I was in preschool, so I grew up most of my life in Canada, and the only time I went back was in a summer when I was 10 or 11 to meet cousins that I had never met my whole life. So yeah, I've grown up most of my life here.
Could you theoretically go back, or would you immediately be identified as a journalist and not allowed to go back?
Yeah, they typically, the Islamic Republic has a playbook of hostage taking and people who are dual nationals, particularly people with high, not even I'm saying I'm high profile, but I'm somewhat Googleable, right? So that could be an important bargaining chip to them. I think what happened to my colleague Jason Rezaian at the Post was a warning for all of us that there's just no way to operate safely as a journalist in Iran, even if you're accredited. Or I look at my friends who are journalists for fantastic domestic papers in Iran, and they're under so much pressure. One friend of mine tweeted after the former President Raisi was killed in a helicopter accident, and just tweeted he was not a martyr, and immediately security services were at their door. Or as we saw, I mean, if you're an accredited journalist in Iran, you're a foreign journalist, you typically can't leave Tehran. It's very difficult to be able to leave the capital. You're highly minded. So it's a very stressful environment to do work in the country.
Yeah. And so tell us how you authenticate the videos that you're seeing, and also preserving the anonymity of the people sending those videos, and the geolocation, how and give us some sense of how many videos you were seeing, say, before the January protests and then during the January protests, and how much you're seeing now.
Yes, I mean, open source reporting is really the best way that we can report on Iran and do accountability-based reporting, but safely. So when I see a video that's, interesting to me, so the Minab school, I'll take that for example. That was on the first day. I was one of the first people to locate it on the internet. Just do want to say that. And so what you do with it is I saw this video and then I would try to figure out, okay, let me find the coordinates of it. How can I make sure that it's authentic? So the first thing I do is I take screenshots in several parts of the video, the beginning, middle, end, and I'll reverse image search those to make sure that this is a current video, because very often in protest rounds, they'll say, this is of the current moment, but it's not if you do a little bit of research. So I did that check first and I felt very comfortable. And then the next step was to locate it so I could understand more about why was the school hit. And so I started talking to some journalists or citizen journalists that got the video first and just asked them, do we know anything about it? And they said, all we know that is this, it's a school in Minab. So then I just started looking around on Google Earth. Minab is a small town in Hormozgan province, a little bit inland from the Strait of Hormuz. And I was just able to match up the features that I saw. So things like there's shrubbery around the school that I was able to match that. There was a pattern on the curb that was this kind of striped pattern. So I was able to match that. It's just a practice called georeferencing. What features can I reference to other existing material? And so I felt really comfortable again after spending probably an hour. I was able to locate it because I had a tip that it's in this town and it's a smaller town. So it was a little bit easier to do. I've spent 3 days on a video as well. Sometimes it can take a long time. So I remember during the Woman Life Freedom protests, I was looking at Sistan Balochistan in the southeast in Iran, and I was looking at an incident that happened in the town of Khash, where state security forces opened live fire on unarmed protesters. And I saw this video that was really important because it showed a automatic, machine gun style rifle mounted on a truck. Those are, extremely deadly. So I thought this is really important because we need to verify this because it shows the level of lethality, which security forces are approaching people. I saw this and then I saw a highway overpass and I naively thought, how many highway overpasses could there be? This town is filled with highway overpasses. So then I had to look at other things. I saw a mountain range in the background. So I went to this fantastic website called Peak Visor, where you can see geographic features and be able to map it that way. But that took me 3 days. Like I tried, and then I was just like, I feel insane. I'm going cross-eyed. I can't look at this anymore. So it just took me really 3 days of going back and forth with that video. So it really depends. Sometimes it can be really easy, sometimes it's difficult, sometimes you're not able to verify it. Sometimes people will film, especially during the massacre that we saw in January. There was a lot of video that people posted that was important, showing civilians after they were shot on the ground, bleeding out, really graphic footage. But I can't verify that. If it's a tight shot and all I see is someone's body, like that, there's just not enough information. So there are important videos that go that we can't use. And typically, the way people film videos, an action happens and then they start filming it. It's not often that we see the moment of impact. With the Minab school, for example, as we were all trying to figure out what type of munition was it, who was responsible for it. A really key piece of evidence that we saw was a missile that many munitions experts have said most likely it's a Tomahawk missile, which the US is the only party in this conflict that has access to this munition. We saw the point of impact, not at hitting the school. As we learned, this was multiple strikes. The school was hit first. But then, but it makes sense, right? An impact happened. People are there, they're filming, and then we just got lucky, really, as viewers, to see the missile hit the second site. And so that's really important in trying to establish exactly who was responsible for what. It's those moments of impact that is extremely important.
And is this something you can do by yourself, but it may take 3 days? Or is this a group project where you could say, hey, I've got this image, but does somebody else have something similar, something so we can piece this together, so we can confirm this is the spot, so I could see a little before this incident happened or a little bit after? But does that again start opening people up to potential detection by a government?
Well, what's really interesting is the open source community. Like we're all really active on X, and a lot of people, I verified this, and as well at the same time, Chris Osek, who's an independent researcher in the Netherlands, verified it. So did Nemo Amo, someone else who's a very prolific geolocator. And so this is a community that's very based on transparency, right? We show each other exactly how we georeferenced it. We have our screenshots, and we'll even all be chatting amongst ourselves. So we actually do info share with each other. And again, it's mostly people that are doing it outside the US. There's a fantastic Persian language fact checking site that started out very recently, a few months ago, called Factname. They're wonderful. So they're starting to do open source, visually led, investigations and doing it in the Persian language, which is such a great service to, Persian speakers.
Hmm. Hmm. Mohammed, let's talk a little bit about what you were facing then as the war began in Gaza. Um, what were your biggest challenges? And again, talk a little bit more about this dual nature. It's not like you were coming in to cover a story. You're of this place. How did the risk to you and your family increase as the war went on and you started to get a sense of what could happen to journalists in Gaza, and even I gather you heard directly from the Israelis.
Well, yes, of course. It was I think there is a tendency, I think, in, when people hear that it was just deadly and fatal for journalists there to, customize their lives to, the pattern and the level of, danger and risk that surrounded every part of the job in Gaza, starting on the morning of October 7th, particularly, but of course, a little bit of, going back in history with that. Anyone who was a journalist in Gaza, anyone who had been like through 2014, 2021, we had this kind of understanding of how quickly things might escalate and the need for having a place where we can call it shelter or a place where we can just seek safety away from the troubles and the challenges of filing stories and assignments. You know, we were dealing with, we saw journalists and friends and colleagues had been killed, in their offices and, in their homes and buildings that, were basically struck while they were sleeping with families. So there was even journalists for Reuters, for Al Jazeera, who were targeted simply for doing the job. And so when, October happened and the scale became clear within the first hours, the volume of strikes and then, the targets and the pace of all of that, people started thinking and making a decision that, was with full knowledge that we knew that flak, jacket doesn't, stop a building from coming on top of us. It was just actually functioning exactly the opposite. It was not a protection. It was more of like, a red target, a red mark on our back. Um, And so, we know the drones are over there. We're not going to be able to escape that. We know the military is onto every sort of like, part of the job. They have, the data, they have, the records, they have the file, and they can be tracking people, whatever they are.
But
Um,
Mohammed, direct to the point, they called you, correct? And
That's absolutely correct. Yes, I myself, I had been away covering, away from home for a week prior to December 7th, 2023, which was like, 2 months into the war then. When I went back home on the evening of December 6th, around 7:30 in the morning when I received this phone call from a no caller ID, somebody that was not identified in my phone. And when I picked up, it was this person who identified themselves as, David from the Israeli military. And he was ordering me to evacuate along with my family and leave the house. Something in that phone call, as risky and as serious as it was, I didn't think that he was really up to that, kind of seriousness level to actually bomb the house, because I thought this is somebody who's actually concerned about me, somebody who's asking me to leave the house. But at the same time, it didn't make any sense that they were actually going to bomb it. And so we stayed. Next morning, the house was bombed. And in that kind of phone call and the messages that, preceded it for weeks before that bombing, they made it explicitly clear that it was actually because of the work and the journalism and the stories we were filing, and I was myself reporting at that moment in Gaza myself. They were citing bylines from those stories. They were citing sources that I had interviewed, places I had been, places I had sheltered on, colleagues I know, people in my team where I reported with, um, who were involved in a way or another in the production act of that story. And so these threats and these texts and calls escalated all the point till December 7th when the house was bombed.
and
um
Mohammed, just tell us what happened in that attack, though, in terms of your family members and the house itself.
it was um it was a three-story building in Gaza City in a neighborhood called the Daraj neighborhood. The house was like really full of people at that point. I was on the second floor. We had family, extended and immediate family, members sheltering in there. We had friends and neighbors who had fled from different parts in the city because at that point the military operation was just undergoing and the Israeli military was penetrating deeper into the city. And so people from eastern parts in the city, like Ashijaiya neighborhood and other, neighboring parts and areas there, they had fled, southward into the heart of the city. So it was almost 30, it was around 30 people at that point in the house. And so including children and elderly people. And so there was no way we could, evacuate the house then for a number of reasons, even if we wanted to. It was evening, it was 6:30 in the evening, almost 7. And all we could hear outside was the drones and the sounds of machine guns on the road. And so it was risky to put ourselves in that kind of exposure under the drones. And the closest shelter where we to evacuate and exit the house was like 30 minutes away, and we had to walk. There was no way to get a transport. And so we couldn't do that. We decided to stay, and we thought maybe this person is, threatening me because of my work, but they're not going to bomb the house. We thought that, they're making a message explicit and typical and direct, as a journalist to me, that they were just trying to silence me and shut me down and scare me off and just let me stop the work I was doing. And at that point, yes, I was really scared. And I thought, I'm going to make a promise to myself. I'm not going to be reporting for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm going to stay home, not going out, not going to be following any stories. Little did I know he was that serious. He was really actually threatening to literally bomb the house, and they did that next morning around 7:30 in the morning on the morning of December 7th. We had to deal with immediate um, injuries and really serious injuries at that moment. But we were under this collapse of the medical system in Gaza City, and so there was no space for us to be hospitalized, and all we were offered was first aid treatment. And so we were sent back to stay at a neighbor's place where we had to deal with the recovery and the aftermath of the attack. And then a few days later we had to get on the run because the military was just making its way closer to where we were staying, and we had to look for a way to escape that danger and look
Right.
for a place
And
that
was
felt
the house,
relatively
is
safer.
the house been inhabitable since then?
It has been inhabitable only once by, because it had to be, somebody had to, seek some safety in there. Family members and friends who contacted me seeking, the house was partially destroyed, but it was also, there were parts in it that were uninhabitable. Right now it's empty. It's on the verge of collapse, so it is really dangerous for anybody to stay inside or seek safety or shelter in there. Right now it is empty. There is nobody in there.
Mhm.
It's almost in ruins, all of it, the 3 stories. But shortly after that, the city had received a number of military operations and strikes that were surrounding the place where we were lived, and all of that, the house was exposed to all of it, and it got, more and further damage and destruction since
Yeah,
then.
yeah, I understand. No, I'm very sorry. I know it was an incredibly tough period and still is.